But yeah, thanks everybody that's prepared, and over to you guys. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paul. And also thanks to Paul PG that we've actually been working together on a proposal to build a content strategy for a customer. So this is real live work that we're using, and quite a few of the slides we're putting together for the presentation. So, I always think it's helpful that when we do these talks, that we can actually share from real world experiences, and this is one that we're working together on. So PG will be helping me in this presentation as well, and PG's done all of the Archimate diagrams, and you'll see them coming along. So if anyone has any questions, then we'll tag on that and interact together. Okay, so because this is a proposal, we've actually, sorry, before I go in there, I just wanted to reiterate in terms of the DMBOK conference, please guys, that was a good question. Di, have you got any answers back on your registration?
No, not yet. No.
Okay. Debbie, did you contact Ruth and actually just check what's happened?
No, but I'm going to send her an email right now and ask about it.
Please just, and then if there's anybody else, anyone from Saudi that would like to attend the conference, please give us a shout and we'll make sure that you get on. So this is the conference. This is free to any DMBOK chapter member. So it'd really be good to have you guys there. There are 22 chapters, and this is the area that we're working in. And you will see now from the next step, and one more. Sorry, these are the areas that we have in terms of DMBOK, and you will see Saudi on the right-hand side here is in a forming status. So we're busy getting ready, and so is Egypt and Botswana. So just trying to complete all the missing gaps on this.
And UAE.
And the UAE, yeah, that's fantastic. So I think that's why it's so wide there, right? Okay, great. So we're not going to go through all the knowledge content the same as what we did, the essential concepts what we did last time. We're going to go straight into how do we achieve what I refer to as knowledgeable content. So I think this is the important one in terms of how do we go from reading the DMBOK and the different areas to actually implementing and designing a strategy and implementing that in an organization. Okay, so these are the steps we go through. So one of the introductions that we did on the presentation was looking or summarizing the essential concepts. And there we see that the first thing is actually sort of describing the difference between document, content, and records. That's the top line. So we've got a document is almost that container, the bucket of water, and very similar to a table in a database. The rows inside is the content and the records. So good to know the difference. And then also the important aspect is the difference between a record and a document, and the record is the official / published version. And a document could be multiple iterations, or, for example, we could be preparing the minutes of a meeting, and we could have 5 versions before everyone signs it. Once it's been signed and published, then it becomes a record. Okay. We've also got content management processes, the techniques and technologies for organizing, categorizing, and structuring information, and we'll see quite a bit of that now. The other one is content metadata. Paul and I were talking a lot about this now in terms of when you start to introduce a knowledge graph. The one thing would be to ingest all your documents into the database, but then what about the metadata in terms of tagging that instance of data? And this is even more applicable when you get big data in, and the big data can be many different forms. So it could be audio, it could be video, and then how would we tag the elements within that, an understanding of what we're talking about. This content modeling is a really exciting area. I really like it. And I'm always fascinated in that it's not far away from our data modeling. So when we build conceptual models and logical models, I think we're doing very similar things with our ontologies and taxonomies. So we'll have a few descriptions on that. And then how do we deliver content? So that's also an important area to know is once we've got all these documents and once we've got all the information, how would we publish it? How do we ensure the quality of the publications, that we haven't made a mistake in building the graphs and compiling the document? And so we have hurdles at the end there that we have to just check that we're doing the right stuff. Okay, Paul, would you like to talk about this one?
Sure. So if we break down we talked a lot about controlled vocabularies, how it now these last few days, because when we're into in our business and with the customers and so on, we often talk about glossaries. We often talk about just being able to understand what words are being used in an organization, what they mean. I was sitting with a customer today actually, and we were doing some Archimate modeling, and this guy's been with his company for quite a while. And as we start to map out some of the concepts on the diagram, he realized that, oh, we've been using this word all this time. In fact, it was a classic one between customer and client, and they've used those words in such a way that both are correct, but they mean completely different things. So controlled vocabularies is about trying to sort out with increasing level of detail and specificity what we mean when we use certain words and what the context is in which they're being used. And so if you look at the sort of mind map there on the left, those are a few characteristics of controlled vocabularies. And when we talk about controlled vocabularies, it's more than just things like a dictionary or a glossary. We want to get to a point where it's taxonomies, where it's not just individual terms that we need to clarify and so on, but also want to clarify how they relate. And the step on after taxonomy is going to be ontology. So controlled vocabularies is a group word for those things, and they are always explicitly those are the yes. And controlled vocabularies are not only the definition of words and so on, but it's also what do we explicitly allow to be used in our business, in our reporting, in our applications and processes. We want to exclude certain words to be used, and make sure we are using words that are making sense. One of our customers is a hospital group in South Africa, and for a long time they've been using the word platform to mean something specific. And when we come into the project, they talk about platform. I mean, what's the first thing that pops into your mind when you hear platform? It is something like an application or a piece of technology or something like that, right? The way that they use it is business platform. So call a country a platform. So they operate in South Africa and the Middle East and Switzerland and UK, and each one of those things are platforms. And everybody was moaning about this and said, look, guys, this is just causing confusion. So eventually they actually almost like banned the word and made sure they talk about the right word, which I think was just operating region or something like that. Anyway, so controlled vocabularies are when we want to constrict the words that we use and be clear on the definition of those that we are using. They are categorized and tagged. Remember, the purpose of creating these vocabularies is so that we can use them in computer systems, so that they can make searches easier, and they can allow us to find words. The controlled vocabularies can actually also be a form of master and reference data, which is an interesting thing to think about. Normally, master and reference data, especially master data, are people, places, and things. But controlled vocabulary is a thing of sorts, and it can actually also be controlled like that. They need to be aligned with the entity names in our enterprise data models. So this is really important. I know that we often get to a company and a customer and they don't have an enterprise model. Many companies don't. And you'll see that those who do have just have a whole lot of better control over misunderstandings, over what their reporting means, over how people speak. All right, so controlled vocabularies, they need to be managed and they need to be controlled. So when we say manage, we just mean make sure about the definitions, the sources where they come from, and we need to make sure we maintain them correctly. And control is about reducing ambiguity, sorting out synonyms, making sure that if we know that, and it's always like that, we've always got terms that we use in the business that are synonyms, that's allowed. But we want to define those and make sure that in our systems that we build, in our searching systems, in our reporting and our production systems, we are being consistent. It's also about sorting out the hierarchies and its associated relationships. So I see Esty is on the call here. Esty and I, we work together on a project at Truers, and one of their biggest challenges with data about their stores is around a specific hierarchy called ZRAB. ZRAB stands for zone. Esther, help me if you can remember. It's a zone, division, I think.
Region, area, and branch.
Branch. And there's so much connected to this this hierarchy because it relates to a region in the area, but managers that manages those areas and the different levels of the areas are being connected to it. Stores are being connected to it. Temporary sales staff are connected to the stores, which are connected to the people who manage them and so on. And that hierarchy was just causing quite a few issues if that's not maintained well and if they use the wrong snapshot and whatnot. So anyway, so those are a few things around control vocabularies. So maybe one takeaway from this is controlled vocabularies is the group name for specific vocabularies, and when we actually say that, we mean taxonomies and ontologies, which is a topic of today's discussion.
Thanks, Paul. And then if we go to the next level, we start seeing how, and ST asked a good question, is the business glossary just a small subset of controlled vocabulary? So yes, a glossary is an instance. And as Paul was talking about, as you progress along this chain, you start to implement more control. So if we talk about a glossary, we've got ambiguity control. We're trying to ensure we don't use the terms incorrectly. Then we go into synonyms, and we go into taxonomies that introduce hierarchical control. And then we go to an ontology where we introduce associative control. So notice how this control progresses and how we get stronger and stronger with an increase of complexity. Plus, as we see here, we have an increase of semantics. So ST, there's your sort of positioning of where a glossary is. Notice that it's low on the semantic level. It does ambiguity control, but doesn't do any of the other issues that these other models do as we progress along this path of getting more clarity, more understanding. And I think Paul raised an important point is, what's the use of doing all of this? And I sometimes get very depressed when I build enterprise data models, and then you come back a year later or 2 years later and no one's using it. Because it hasn't got to a point where the machines are starting to make use of it to understand the document. So that's the nice thing about OWL. We had a brief chat in our class yesterday about it originated a lot of times at the universities, and when people wrote their thesis, they would use that Turnitin application that would pick up plagiarism. And it was this sort of use of machine readable understanding, be able to ingest documents, understand what the documents are, and then start to do some reasoning Did you copy it from somebody else? Is this your new idea, or is it something that you've really plagiarized from another person? So we're all trying to get to a point where at least all of this intense work is usable by a machine to understand, and then to help us understand things that we don't know and we're not aware of. That's an important point. Okay, so we're trying to progress along the clarity, the semantic clarity. These are examples of technologies. So we would use a glossary in Word. We can do it appropriately in Word. Of course, it's really hard to get the control. So we'd get something like Informatica that would help us. We're then going to XML and then UML for some of the data models, RDF for taxonomies, and then concept maps, and OWL for ontologies. Okay, that's how this diagram works, and it's helpful. But notice how you're spending more and more time and more money to achieve this level of semantic understanding. But we really hope that people are starting to see the value that you can get out of something like this. Okay, so here's just another diagram, and we won't spend too long on this in terms of the difference between a document and a record. That a record is a subset. It provides evidence of actions taken. So if we had minutes of the meeting and we agreed on it, it's got that evidence. If we've signed a contract, we also want to just ensure that the documents are not tamperable, they cannot be changed. So if we have to go to court, we can prove it. First of all, we have to prove that the document hasn't been tampered with. And second of all, we can then justify that we came to this in agreement, and this was our conditions that we had the agreement with. Esty, you got a question?
Yeah, I'll also ask that. So it's almost more with the previous one. Like, is this something a company can almost like pre-set up, like they have a business plan that they set up kind of before they start? Or is this something that really only actually develops while you're busy working, almost?
Yeah, and so that's a good question, and we'll get to it in terms of when we would define a content strategy. This is going to come out in terms of the content strategy, these different elements. So Paul's done a great job of putting this all into Archimate in terms of the process of doing this. So if I'm understanding your question correctly, you would ask, when would we start defining these things? Is that correct? How would we plan for them, and what would the roadmap look like?
Yeah, that would be very accurate.
Okay, so we're getting to that. This is sort of what we're suggesting to the customer that we're talking about, our ability to put forward a content strategy, and how would we link that into the life cycle. So give us a couple minutes and we'll get there, and we'll start to show you what it looks like. All right, so this is a little bit more detail on records management. Just to share with you guys again, in terms of information is made up of what we refer to as content and data. The documents house that content. We then have records across multiple documents that are in our unstructured data as well as our databases. So we can see records going across, and then knowledge as well, which is contained in documents and in data and database systems. Okay. Now, the sort of life cycle that we'd look at, and here's an example of that life cycle for e-discovery, where we start off at information governance. We design the type of documents we're interested in, and this is also appropriate for preservation. And that would help us identify the documents that are important to us. We would then capture the appropriate preservation information, collect the data, and we go through this life cycle, and we'll also talk about that in a little detail. Now, what we're trying to do from a governance point of view is, we do understand that document and content can make up 80% of the volume of your data that you have within the organization. So we're trying to reduce the volume and increase the relevance of the documents. Okay, what we don't want is 15 different SharePoint libraries with 50,000 documents and we battle to understand the relevance of the documents that we have, and then we battle to dispose of the ones that we need, and then everyone gets scared of applying that. So important aspects to record management: it's managed, the record's managed on the full life cycle, all the way from planning and preservation, with that you agree with lawyers what the content should be. We then look at the records can be physical, they can be on a piece of paper, they could be on a X-ray diagram. Okay, and the interesting thing about an X-ray is it doesn't have, it's one of those elements that don't have versioning. Okay, so the document and the content and the record are the same thing. It could be electronic, it could be web content. As soon as you publish something on your website, there's a legal commitment that you've made. Documents of different form and documents in any database. A vital record is something that you need to identify for business continuity purposes. So if you have a crash or your business burns down, your building burns down, how can you recreate an alternative site and reestablish all the records? Okay, and then we have the idea of a trustworthy record where we've got compliance and integrity. Okay, and then we'll go to the data quality. This is especially for DI. DI, do you know all the data quality dimensions for a record? Ah, she's gone quiet.
Yeah, no, can you repeat the question, Howard?
Okay, so without looking at the screen before I go there, can you give me the data quality dimensions for a record?
Or content, completeness, accuracy?
Very close. So there you go, content, that is correct. Context, timeliness, permanency or tamper-proof. This is specifically to a record. And then structure, that we understand the structure that we have it in.
Yeah, it's great. Howard, I've just found a wonderful article on data quality dimensions that's come from Dharma, the Netherlands.
Oh, yes, that lady, Irina, I think it is. Irina, the doctor.
No, it's Andrew Black.
Okay.
And yeah, it's from 2020, about September. Great stuff.
Okay, would you mind putting a link in the chat box for everyone to see?
Yeah, let me find it again. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Di. Okay, so from here we, and I'm sure you've seen it before, people have spoken about GAAP, GAAP, which is generally accepted information principles, and then we've got GARP, which is record keeping principles. We don't want to spend too much time here because we've been through it before, but it's the principle of accountability for record keeping, senior execs, the principle of integrity, authenticity and reliability of our documents and records. That's really critical. If a record relates to the official acknowledgement or record of what happened, we better ensure that we've got the appropriate integrity. Protection, personal information is being looked after, compliance, availability, retention, disposition in terms of disposing, and then transparency. So do we have transparency of all our case flows and workflows of documents within our organization? Those are principles. This is quite exciting in terms of information architecture. So what is information architecture? And it's that process of creating structure for a body of information or content. So we're almost designing a structure that we can use to ingest content and that we can understand it. And this has really helped us when we prepared this for what are the deliverables that we need to produce as part of a content strategy. So we're having to produce controlled vocabularies, taxonomies and ontologies, navigation maps. So how would you navigate through this mass of information and content that we have? How would we get there? And I mean, that's even appropriate with BI reports. How would we navigate to find a report, a BI report, a Power BI report on any element? And Paul Bolton can attest to that. We started a BI development on the company that he used to work for, and I think we got there, and there was in the region of 3,000 or 4,000 reports, but no one knew where to get the data. No one knew where to go to find insights in a certain area. So it was missing navigation maps. We couldn't work out where to go. Metadata maps, search functionality, use cases, and user flows of documents. All right. So this is the context diagram for the DMBOK, and as we mentioned last week, there was one of the deliverables that's missing, which is controlled vocabularies, business glossaries included. All right, Paul, can you take over the DMBOK lifecycle?
Sure. So what Laura Sebastian Coleman has done, for those of you who know, she's been involved in the actual editing of the DMBOK. But what she's done is she has taken the standard lifecycle that's in the DMBOK, but she's applied them to each of the different knowledge areas. And so what Hart and I have done is we use this and we try to take the life cycle and just apply our own minds also to how we can use this process to help us actually create the solution. Specifically around, we're very interested in building a larger solution as well, but the Ontologies is a great point of interest for us at the moment. So what we've done is we've taken this and we've unpacked this into Archimate. Those of you who know me knows that I do very little unless I have first played a little bit in Archimate and sorted my own head out. And Howard will tell you it's because I'm very random. His thinking test has proved that. And so it stays random until I can put this into a bit of structure. So that's what I've done. Maybe just click the next one. So what I've done is we've taken this life cycle and just put it into Archimate. I can share this with you, but really this is just the high level process. And what we are doing is we are taking each of these steps and unpacking them and trying to apply our minds what would be in each of these blocks. So this is the overview. It's basically the previous cycle, just as a starting point in Archimate. And you can go next, Howard. And the first step we're looking at is just plan. You have to click next now. Thank you. All right. So in the first one, there's basically two things we need to concentrate on, right? We need to define, as with many things in the DMBOK, we have to define our strategy. We have to put our thinking hats on and unpack what is it that we want to do. And of course, the document and content goals is what we need to start with. Now, I've actually had a lot of difficulty really getting my head around this concept of ontologies and how they relate with all the content that we have. But just if you zoom out and you just think about it this way, we all get to customers, we are new on a project, and we just struggle a lot to figure out what's going on there. I haven't actually been to, I can't think of one company that I could go to and use proper search technology to search the intranet, let's put it this way, or enterprise search. I want to be able to go to a Google-like interface and spend a bit of time there and just get a feel for what's going on, especially if I've got some 1 or 2 or 3 lines, like when you bait a hook for a fish. There's a few things that you would come into an organization that you know about. If you are coming into the organization and you need to help them build a warehouse or write some reports or do something like that, you would get a feel for what it is. So you have 1 or 2 or 3 words, but you want to see how they relate to other terms, other things. Now, if you take that concept and you go deeper into it and you say, I don't only want to know how the concept of actuarial triangle, which is a real problem a real sort of concept that we're dealing with. You don't only want to know how that relates to insurance, but you also want to know how that relates to policies, and not only the concept of policies, for example, but actual real documents policies. Of course, I need to have the right permissions to do that, this sort of thing. Now, content management and ontologies is about that. It's not just about relating concepts together. It's about relating both the concepts and the instances of the concepts together. So if I want to find out about what kind of policies this insurance company or my client, what kind of policies does it deal with? That's one thing I can find out. But what I also want to find out is, okay, well, give me a few examples of those if I have access to that. And once I'm in the policy document, where does it lead me? What does it tell me about claimants or policyholders or the syndicate that actually needs to underwrite these policies, etc. So these kind of things are what we need to think about right in the beginning when we need to think about goals. So I'm going to have, I can go and buy one, and I've thought a lot about Axon during this conversations with Howard. Esther, you know a little bit about Axon. Axon is a good starting point, but it's still deeper than something like Axon. And here's where we need to find out and think about what are our goals. Do I need to make this kind of content available for my users? Who are my users? What do they need it for? What kind of what's going to be? Remember, we talk about controlled vocabularies. So what I'm going to allow in and what am I going to allow disallow? So what I want to do with this thing, plot a charter, how I'm going to get there, where's the funding going to come from, who am I going to help, what are my objectives, communication plan, all the good stuff from a strategy, right? Now, you'll see that I've included the data estate there. And I see I'm getting a bad network link here, so I'm hoping I'm still all right. The data estate is a super important thing at this point in time, because if you don't have a limit on your scope, you will not be able to, you're just going to go into a lot of places where you probably are just going to waste time. Howard, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to just also explain and add something to what you're suggesting in terms of corporate memory. So how would we get that sort of tacit knowledge and almost get us away from having to ask people about the type of contracts and policies, but how do we get it explicit? So how do we take this knowledge and create an engine, a search engine, where we can derive the information and not be dependent on people?
Yes, that's thanks for that, Howard. That's a helpful comment. It is about reducing. At the end of the day, it's about reducing the necessity to go to a person and instead see what you can find that's collected in corporate memory. Cool. So when we look at data estate, meaning out of all the data that's in my systems, which data groupings do I really want to focus on? First, second, and third. And when we do strategies, there's always a short and an immediate attention, and then you get the medium and the longer term ones. And one way for us to help us to get to that is also to do data estate SWOT analysis. So once we know what data objects we want to maybe focus on, let's do a SWOT, see where our opportunities are, see where our weaknesses and strengths are, and work from that. And then the implementation roadmap. So in planning, a lot of things are being done, and as with all the steps, and what you decide here and what you set up to be your scope is really going to affect your timing, your budget, what you can actually do, and etc. The second one in this plan step is to define the metadata and information. And this is where we need to see, well, do I already have any current taxonomy structures? People might not call that taxonomy structures, but we are that in the data game, we can look at knowledge, we can look at certain artifacts in the business and see what can we extract from our databases, from our current content management systems, from informal documents maybe, or even things that we've done. Yeah, and these are a few examples that Howard is popping up for one of our current customers. You want to go through that quick?
Yeah, so in the last month or two, working with a current customer, we've converted all of their data from SharePoint they got 15 SharePoint sites, and they had an application that was doing a great job of recording what files were in SharePoint and then allowing people to have tags. So they've got a whole lot of tags that we went to just understand the possible data that could be used. So if you look at this, and Paul's right, they may not call it a taxonomy, but look at the structure that's sitting in the operating territory name. And I think we've all been aware of that in terms of there's the US, the different areas, and we know that operating territory has a structure, has a classification, and that's a great taxonomy. We can see all these duplicates here where we have line slip and line slip, whatever it is, and binders. So they've got, again, different groupings. And then the interesting thing is you can see that there's associations between these classifications. So here we've got natural resources, we've got in impact classification, we've got natural resources in finance, and we've got natural resources in divisions. So now we're talking about an association between elements and not just hierarchical structures. Okay.
Cool. So at this point in time, we want to actually go and study what we have, like what Howard's done there. He's collated some information, and that's going to go into our planning. That's going to go into our new and desired taxonomy structures, which will eventually be going into ontology. All right, you can go next, Howard.
Okay.
So the next one is design. Let's go next one. Ooh, I did actually make a change on the slide just to make it a bit bigger. So sorry if you have to squint. I'm going to have to. But so in this one, define and enable, a lot of this is what we often talk about, the P3T, the people, process, technology. No, sorry, that's principles. What is it, Howard? It's principles, policies,
procedures, principles, policies, and procedures.
And technology. And for these, we have to think about these in terms of the documents itself, the records, which could be present in documents, right? Any content handling and e-discovery. So if we think about e-discovery, those are, we've played in a couple of projects with cool tools, things like EDC will be an example of that, Enterprise Data Catalog, for those who know. That would be something like DPM from Informatica as well, data privacy management. Those are kinds of things where you have technology helping you to go crawl sources and bring back metadata for you. And in the class that I gave this week, I put a picture up because I needed to do this. I'm working with these great people at this company, and they do a lot of good coding, but there's no way to know what they've done because there's no tools that can extract the metadata and get the lineage for me. So I had to do this by hand, and I put this up. I had a Miro board and a whole lot of pictures and lines between them and so on. I had to do that manually. It takes a lot of time. And the point is that if you have technology and invest in that, that you can use to help you just get a lot of the metadata out, get the lineage out, it's a huge help, but you won't often have that. I just see there's a hand up. I can't see who.
I think it's okay. I think it's Debbie.
Hello. I wanted to ask, when do we use our acronym from last week? I think it was silly little red tape can produce conflicting ideas. So when would we put that into practice?
I can't remember that acronym, so I'm hoping Howard can answer that.
Yeah, sure. So Paul, that was in the design of the ontology. So remember we had the different steps on the ontology, and that would come into this idea here. So it was a combination from what you had on your last slide to here when we start designing the information architecture. when we go and look at what's the scope of our ontology, what's the reuse that we have, the terms and elements like that.
Debbie, does that answer your question?
Does it answer, yeah, so it's basically, we would work with the data citizens to define the ontology that's applicable and scope it that's applicable to this environment in our data estate, right?
Yeah. Cool. So this is where we think about and write out whether we do it formally or less formally, but this is where we think about each of these areas individually: documents, records, content handling, e-discovery, and then just the landscape. Now, if you look at the blue blocks, blue in Archimate designates application or data objects. So this is really where we're also going to go into existing metadata sources, how it has started with that in the previous picture that I showed. We actually get into potential new sources that would have been given to us by things like the e-discovery ideas, right? And ultimately, at this point in time, we need to get our information architecture sorted out and everything that entails. So a lot of the conceptual thinking has been done and the planning has been done in the planning stage. This is taking it to the next level. We now need to apply our mind specifically to the customer situation and specifically to the systems, the documents, the sources that's there, and think about how do we want to take this forward and how's information architecture going to look like. I've also just included here the GARP, the generally accepted record keeping principles. I think Howard did mention them before, but this is also especially important when we think about our policies and principles and procedures. These are the things that will help us guide our efforts.
Yeah, and I think that was, well, there was is an interesting thing that certainly helps people that define policies. Those policies should point to the principles and actually explain how we're going to apply those principles to our organization.
Yeah, I like the way that I think it's John Ladley who calls it a policy is the thing that gives principles teeth.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The way in which this comes to the fore.
And also someone, actually, I like someone else's thing in our talk. They were talking about some of the policies for the national data strategy in Saudi, and it's what needs to be done and what not. So it's also the things that we don't want to happen.
Yeah. Yes. All right. We can click on next. So the create step in the, just recall that we're using the DMBOK lifecycle here. I see I must update that label of mine. It says step 1 plan, yeah. But it's create. So this is great. This is where we actually now go and create the documents, the content, and obtain existing documents and content. And we are now busy. We've thought about the scope. We've defined what we want to do. We've defined the roadmap. We've designed our policies and procedures and so on. We have our information architecture. But in this step, this is where we create and ingest the content. And in doing that, this is where it's becoming important that we do the right tagging, that we do the right categorization, or discover it if we have the right tools. So this is the create step, pretty straightforward. Maybe just go to the next one. And I think that's going to be enhance, store and enhance. Okay, so store this is where we actually get the content and store it in our newly developed, perhaps, system, or if the solution that we're writing is one that goes and continually accesses and crawls and brings together the different parts of the metadata. This is where all that needs to happen. The documents are stored in the content management system, but it's not only the documents, it's also all the metadata. And we need to make sure that the metadata is of good quality, because the most important thing from a search perspective, if our searches are going to be accurate, if it brings back what we want, so read not your typical SharePoint site, because you just go in there, you search, and there's a whole bunch of things coming up that doesn't work. There's only one guy that I know that can create good SharePoint sites, and that's Nadir Kamdar. I will recommend him a lot. Anyway, so right, so we store the documents in the content management system, and we make sure that the metadata is of high quality, and we create that as well. The metadata is not only for discovery, but also for preservation. All right, so we need to include information about preserving it, especially from a records point of view, and or information around archiving, disposal, etc. And then also data quality metadata for data provenance functions. And then we need to physically then manage and preserve. So this is in the store, on the store step. You can go next. When we use it, okay, so this is maybe just one step, but this is, I mean, this is really where the rubber hits the road. This is where users go and find the corporate memory, that information and the data that they need. And this interface is super important. And just think of Google again. They're the master of search simplicity. You only have one search box, but there's so much going on when you do the searching. There's autocomplete. It helps you. It tries to guess what you want to look at. It knows the context. It knows where you are. It can pick up nuances and things like that. And that's why we all use it. And from a CMS point of view, this is the kind of thing that you want in your organization as well. Not just something that you type into and it gives you a flat result set of things that actually doesn't matter and that you're just going to skip over. No, you want to get results back that is relevant to what you want to know, that can actually lead you to other linked documents and content, etc. And this is, I think, especially also where nice, search box is nice, but graph, for those of us who like to traverse a graph and see where it leads us, and this is also the kind of interfaces that you build there. Okay, and what I've included here is just from a CMS perspective, whatever your interface is, this could be a custom system or whatnot, or it can be an off-the-shelf system, but you would need to create APIs or make sure that you've got connections into all the relevant areas that you have to find up front, right? So if you want your search box or your search interface to bring back not only documents, but information that is found in the documents, which it already extracted and tagged, and from there on take you maybe to additional databases or take you to different areas. Those are the things that you would have spec'd up front, where you design your ontology, you design actually what you want, how your controlled vocabularies are going to operate. At this point in time, you need to make sure that that all those wonderful ideas that you have, your systems need to be able to get to those aspects that you've defined. So this is also where a lot of API use and so on is brought in. You would have defined these things up in your design stage, where you look at your information architecture. Okay, you can go next.
Yeah, Paul. So what I wanted to just remind people of was the sort of slide that we had last week, where we're wanting to bring our content and our database management system plus our knowledge graph, the ontology, into something where everything's related, again, so that we can start applying questioning and reasoning onto that area. So that's, and then it's really helpful if you can have the APIs so that machines can then also interface with that different structure as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
That looks like, do you know what graph this is, Howard? It looks like Neo4j.
I think so. I think it was the same that I think we used.
Okay.
For the Steiner one, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So in the enhance cycle, I think this is going to be this is a step that is actually always going to happen because, as we've also discussed earlier, Howard, I mean, the whole point of a good ontology is to help you know what you don't know yet. So it makes your discoveries. It helps you find information that wasn't apparent before. And as you learn about those things, as you learn more about things that you didn't know before and now you do, perhaps new relationships, perhaps new kinds of relationships, new types that you weren't aware of before. At this point in time, this is where you actually tag it and make sure it forms part of your ontology. It's about contextualizing the content and using descriptive semantic metadata, and it's a constant process of improving both the content and the richness of all your data and your content, and also trying to see in what other ways you can bring in additional data or data types or data classes that you haven't thought of before. All right, and it's also obviously at this point in time, this is where a lot of API exchange will happen. I think the last step would be disposal. This is where we correctly identify and purge data items based on requirements. We need to think about things perhaps here like regulation or irrelevance or things like that. And we're looking at our policies to help us with those kind of decisions. Let's look into our principles. And I think those are the 6 steps. Yeah, so any comments, any questions?
I had a question on whether you would apply a kind of an industry taxonomy or an industry type of model to a company. Would you rather talk to the company and kind of apply using their specific words and terms? And then almost a follow-up or more a realization on my side, that's probably where like the next step, that synonyms might come in. Or not completely.
Yeah, it's actually, and I think we would apply it the same way as we use an industry data model. The idea is that we don't just take that and make that our data model. We have to derive our conceptual models, logical models from that reference model, and then apply our appropriate terminology. Now, the nice thing about a hierarchy is, remember, the hierarchy goes from general to narrow. So broad goes broad to and wide to narrow. And the industry data model and ontology is really good at defining the wide or the general. And then we would narrow it down for our organization and our terminology. And so it gives us somewhere to connect to, right?
It's something to almost expand to, or potentially be able to expand to.
Yeah, so we'd probably narrow and go wider. So, for example, if they defined something like a party, our people may not be aware of a party, and then we would define almost that more specialized version of that for our organization. But
yeah, so we might call it a customer.
The industry data model would give us that very general definition, and then it would be up to us to specialize that. So same technology, same approach that you use to bringing an industry data model into your organization, you'd bring an industry taxonomy and then go narrower to define your context that you're using it.
Okay, cool. Makes sense. Thank you.
Or if I think about especially the work we've done at MedScheme, in the beginning of the project, we went in there with the reference model that dealt with actually with a combination of medical industry and insurance. but a lot of the words is not only specify. We didn't only need to just take the general and specify it. Some of the words are just, we had to change it completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And use words is just already part of the vernacular of that business. So yeah, I agree. It'll be the same with Ontology. Okay, so who wants to build ontologies? I mean, obviously now is Tiger Graph, or I still think we could do it.
ST wants to build it, of course. Yes.
Of course. Yeah, we'll do it.
At ST, I think I remember talking to you about it some time back, almost 6 months back, where we were talking about using this in industrial engineering from a corporate memory point of view, operational memory in terms of processes.
Yeah, it's very fascinating to me because it's a really very relevant
How would something like this be applied in industrial engineering? I remember us talking about it briefly, but not. I can't remember all the details of the discussion.
I think it would potentially be almost industry specific, depending on where the industrial engineer works. But it would give a lot of guidance on like kind of how to almost do layouts or structures, or even like company structures, and then even potentially processes. How the process would flow between the different kind of levels of the taxonomy on the ontology.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just brief thoughts on that.
Okay.
That's interesting though, because we've had a few conversations, especially around industrial engineering, which is so diverse, and it can basically, well, maybe industrial engineering is not diverse, but certainly industrial engineers are, and they call ST and her friends. I mean, you would have ST and her friends, 5 people, but you'll have 10 different career options that they have. So that would be interesting. An ontology for industrial engineering would be interesting.
I mean, I think that's appropriate. Like any domain, be it legal, be it whatever it is, you're wanting to build that taxonomy ontology of the word map from a body of knowledge point of view. So should we be doing it for data management? Yeah, we understand then how it's applied.
And then somehow make the design so that it's not so rigid to not leave room for change or improvement or expansion.
Now, Esther, you bring up that's a fantastic point, because we were talking about now how would we do that with our ontology? And the nice thing about a graph database is, and we were talking about schema on read, schema on write. So if we use a knowledge graph, then we can still bring data in that may not be typed at the point when we bring the data in. So we may bring a document about ABC, and we haven't defined that. Now, the nice thing that you have now is you can identify what instance data have you brought in that doesn't have an ontology mapping or a knowledge mapping. And there you could see what you don't know and what you don't understand. So it's a really powerful way of managing when data comes in. And I think the philosophers did this. They would have these maps. When someone published a paper, they would map it to the map, and they would say, okay, what is it that you're talking about that I'm not aware of? And if I'm not aware of it, have you distorted the truth, or have you added something to the body that we're not aware of?
That's a very interesting idea. Like thinking even if like published papers, if like a large publishing company has that type of thing, that you could see how things link, that would be very interesting.
Yeah, and that's what we got to do, right? So as documents are being published, we want to be able to ingest it and then learn from those documents, and which means that we may need to extend our ontology to learn something that we weren't aware of, or we can say that this is incorrect.
I guess in terms of academic publishing, I mean, there's already a lot of good work that's being done by like Turnitin.
Yes.
You know, it can already detect certain potential problems, but now the next step is to ask not only, okay, this is not plagiarism, but is this actually a brand new idea, or where does it fit into the ontology? Publishing academic papers would be a very interesting.
Now, Paul, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you guys. I'm sure you've heard me talk about FIBO, which is the financial industry business ontology, right?
Yeah.
So they ingest transactions, stock market transactions, into that ontology. They can determine the structure of those transactions and the tranches and the things. And then on top of that, they build a FIRO, which is the financial industry regulatory ontology, which helps you regulate the data by looking at the patterns of the transactions in the data. You're now able to apply rules, regulatory rules, to the data, to the knowledge graph.
Okay.
So you build compliance as an ontology.
Yeah, that's cool. That is pretty cool. Who else wants to say something?
Veronica. I haven't heard Veronica say anything.
I was just listening. But I'm glad that diagram with the technologies and the different sort of levels of complexity of the taxonomies. I'm glad you did that one, because that one always I sort of feel a bit iffy about that when I explain it.
Yeah, and I actually did that. Ruan, which is Johan's old boss, he looked at that diagram and said, "Howard, what are you trying to tell me here? You know, what from a data management point of view, how does it help me look for and justify sort of what are we trying to do here, and how do we relate these two areas together?" So we wanting to get to express it so that a machine can understand it. And we want to support all of these different vocabularies as they progress in complexity. We need that level of support from a technology point of view, to a point where you're getting to OWL and AI machines can make use of the data and learn. And I was talking to somebody else about this process of being able to use OWL and ontologies to capture knowledge. So if we could use it to train our people, so if we had a new lawyer coming in and they needed to look at the way in which we do stuff, if we could get a new person to a comfortable state very quickly, you could almost say, well, now we should be able to trust the machine to be able to make the right decisions very quickly and faster.
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah. Noah, I see you've got a question on the recording. Debbie, have you paid attention to that? Noah?
Sorry, I haven't been able to see the chats. It just keeps loading.
Okay, so there's a question from Noah to say, where do the recordings and slides of these sessions sit or shared? And they've reached out, but they haven't got that.
Oh no, I will check my email. But if you send to social@modelware systems, I will send it through to you.
Okay, so yeah.
And then we will, sorry?
Yeah, so
No,
can you
that's
just repeat the email again? I actually reached out through the chat for Howard, but I'm not sure if that's reached out because we're not a connection. But can you repeat the email that you mentioned?
It's social@modelware systems. That I'll actually put it in the. I'll put it here in the chat.
Awesome, thank you.
Awesome.
Apologies for that. Apologies, I didn't get it done.
No worries. I wasn't sure if you actually have received the email because we're not a direct connection on LinkedIn.
Oh, no, I haven't.
Yeah,
but if
I'm not sure.
Yeah, the other thing that Debbie picks up on is as I do the post and you comment on the post, then we know that you need it and Debbie can get it to you.
Okay, will do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Bolton, over to you.
Hey, thank you, guys. Just before you ask me, I was also listening.
Yes, we wanted to know what you learned.
Thanks very much. Great information. After last week, things are starting to fit together nicely.
Okay, and then congratulations for you passing your CDMP.
Yes, congratulations, Paul.
Yeah.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.